Coming up on this week's show, why the best soccer leagues are not the most popular, what MLS Is Back TV ratings tell us about soccer on US TV, how Peacock did on its first major day of Premier League coverage, are CBS Sports heading in the right direction? Plus, we have letters from you, the listeners, in our mailbag section. I'm Christopher Harris, aka The Gaffer, joined alongside my co-host Kartik Krishnaiyer. Kartik, it sounds like you're pouring yourself a cup of tea there in the background.
Yeah, or actually a glass of water. But
No worries. Well, it's good to have you back on the show. There's a lot to get to. I mean, there's been a lot of soccer going on. I mean, and actually right before this podcast, we started talking about it, and I said, like, hey, let's record this because it's important. It feels like, it's a good feeling, but it feels like the candle is burning at both ends when you have early MLS games, you have late MLS games, and then throughout the day, you've got everything from NWSL to the Premier League to the Championship and other leagues. There's a lot of soccer going on. In some ways, it's escapism from what's going on in the real world. But I'm getting tired, Kartik. I'm enjoying it. I mean, I'm watching a ton of games. I shouldn't really complain. I'm enjoying it. It's just it's a lot to take in.
yeah, I'm exhausted from it. But for me, the MLS Is Back tournament has been so good that I don't want to miss any of it. Although I will admit that there are two matches I didn't watch, and both involve Inter, the team called Inter. But I've watched every other minute of every other match, and I think the other aspect of this is the European races have gotten good. Now, with Atalanta, we're going to get to what we watched, but if there isn't that controversial handball late on in the Atalanta-Juventus match, you have a genuine title race going to the wire in Italy with Atalanta, maybe 3 or 4 points only behind Juventus. The Premier League, the race for the top four is interesting. The championship is super interesting. Brentford has not dropped a point since before the COVID break. They are now on West Brom's heels for that final automatic spot. La Liga is coming down to the wire. Barcelona seems to have found some life right at the right time. And it's been really good. NWSL also, right? I mean, although that's been more predictable because, as always, North Carolina wins everything. But,
right.
Portland hasn't been very good. And so that's opened up who's the second best team in NWSL conversation, which we haven't had in a while either. So
let's start with favorite games of the week. I'll chime in with mine. Mine was a surprise. I didn't expect it to be this way. It was Bournemouth against Leicester City. And it was a tale of two halves. The first half, it was a domination by Leicester. They looked really strong. I think at halftime, it was 1-0 to Leicester, looking like Bournemouth not out of the escape zone by any means, but looking pretty flat. And then the second half was a completely different game. Bournemouth winning this one 4-1. It could have easily been 5-1, 6-1. Bournemouth missing a couple of really simple chances, but it shows that there's some fight back in Bournemouth. Of course, they lost midweek to Man City, but put in a good performance. And as always, but it hasn't been as always, because of late in the last few seasons, the relegation battle hasn't been that exciting. But again, we're recording this on Thursday, so it depends on what Aston Villa does. But Bournemouth at least are fighting to try to stay up. And to me, it's good entertainment. I enjoy. I would like to see Bournemouth stay up. But then Watford, it's hard. It's hard. I never wanted a team to go down unless it's Cardiff City. I never want a team to go down, but at least Bournemouth's giving it a good fight.
Yeah, Bournemouth is now giving it a good fight. They weren't giving it a good fight until the second half of the Spurs match. They had seemed very lifeless. The Ryan Fraser situation, I think, took a lot out of them. That's probably their best player, and his selfishness, unwilling to sign a 1-month extension, Eddie Howe decided to freeze him out. And there were 4 matches between the time when Fraser refused to sign the extension and his contract expired, where Howe elected not to play him. David Brooks clearly was not fully fit, still isn't, even though he scored, obviously, against Manchester City. So I hope they stay up. I'm rooting for them. I will admit this openly here. I did not root for Manchester City yesterday. I was rooting for Bournemouth to at least get a point in that match. it's still going to be very difficult, but they're still fighting. And Solanke has come good at the right time. Junior Stanislas, who to me is one of the great underrated players of the last decade. I mean, he's hung around Burnley and Bournemouth as a regular for a decade now, coming through at the right times also. So let's see if they can if they can keep it up, and if they can catch Watford playing West Ham. If one of those teams loses, opens the door for Bournemouth. My favorite match of the week, very predictable. Juventus and Atalanta. It was a great match of football. It was a title decider because Juventus, I think, has won the title because they got that late handball and got a point and took 2 points off of Atalanta. It would have been a 6-point swing otherwise. Atalanta in second in Serie A. Juventus top of the table. It was back and forth, end-to-end action. Atalanta fearless and just such an exciting side to watch. Also, Steve Banyard and Stuart Robson, the commentary team. So that's a commentary team that I'd like to hear more of, right? I mean, I think, unfortunately, neither is doing Premier League matches anymore, although Robson actually did do the Bournemouth with Gary Taphouse, the Bournemouth Spurs match.
Yeah, so, just to chime in, so Stuart Robson, and actually you missed it on last week's pod, but the last few weeks he's been doing a few games in the Premier League, so he's coming back and doing some of the kind of not the big matches, but he is coming back and doing some of the co-commentary. So there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Maybe he'll come back for some of the bigger profile, higher profile games, Kartik. So there's hope on the horizon. Yeah,
and Steve Banyard, we haven't heard much of on the Premier League broadcast for a while now. Banyard, like Robson, their reputations are more kind of cosmopolitan. Their reputations are more kind of diverse than your classic Premier League announcer. So they called a great match. And look, in that Bournemouth Spurs match, I think I tweeted it within 20 minutes, that Robson was giving us better analysis as a co-commentator than you ever get on Premier League productions from other co-commentators. That's not a shot. That's just my opinion. Because he sees the match sort of differently. So, that was my favorite match of the week. In terms of the quality of play, I will tell you it was devastating at the end. So maybe I like your pick better because I was happy with that result. Whereas, although I want Leicester to finish in the top 4, so that was the kind of dilemma there. But it was heartbreaking how Atalanta lost that or drew that match.
It is interesting, though, to Kartik, at this time of the season, is that soccer fans will watch teams that they usually don't watch, or they'll cheer for teams that they usually don't cheer for. So, for example, for me, focusing on the championship, I'm listening to radio commentaries. I'm watching games of teams that I don't support. So I will. I listened to. I think last week was Cardiff against. I think Birmingham City, was it? Or one of the games. Oh, no, Blackburn against Cardiff. I listened to the radio commentary of that one on TalkSport 2 for 90 minutes because I wanted Blackburn to win the game and I wanted Cardiff to lose because, Swansea are in the championship playoff race against Cardiff. And, same for you too. Kind of cheering on Bournemouth against your team, Man City. And it's interesting because I think at this time of the season, at least in the promotion, relegation and playoff races, is that viewers will tend to probably watch, in some ways, more games, but different types of games than what they would normally watch. So let's talk about Peacock. Peacock launched officially to the general public on Wednesday, July 15th. It was historic, in quotation marks, in that it was the very first day of NBC's coverage of the Premier League in 7 years that every single game was not on television. It was on a streaming platform. In this case, it was Peacock, and it was free for everyone. So I'm going to talk about the pros and cons from what I saw, Kartik, and feel free to chime in too. So the pros, it was 6 hours commercial free. And the interesting thing about that too is that it allowed us to see some pre-match interviews that we kind of more in-depth interviews that we tend to not see because they usually go to commercial break. So that was a pleasant surprise. The picture quality seemed to be better than NBC Sports Gold, and that's about it. I can't think of any other pros for what I saw on Peacock.
So let me point out what I was doing right before this podcast started. I've spent the last 20 minutes installing Peacock on my smart television, something I did not realize I could do yesterday. I did not realize they had an LG. I have an LG TV, an LG app. It popped up this morning when I turned CNN on, and there was a note, download Peacock. I wish I had known this yesterday. So what I ended up doing was using the iPad yesterday, and it was virtually kind of indistinguishable from NBC Sports Gold that way. Although, let me point out, the idea that they bring in Liam McHugh, who's one of the big guns at NBC Sports, and they have Robbie Earle and Kyle Martino in the studio, and that they're doing it like a normal NBC Sports broadcast with their top talent. I don't know if that's a one-off, if that was a first day thing, or if they plan to have studio shows and this sort of level of analysis during Peacock games, because that is something they did not do on NBC Sports Gold. So that's my question, Chris. I mean, maybe it's just a first day thing. I think
it's just a one-off thing. Yeah. So for next season, 175 games will be on Peacock exclusively. So those will be non-televised games. And NBC Sports Gold will be going away. So Peacock would be the only way you could watch those 175 games. And as we have each kind of different development from NBC Sports over the years, from NBC Sports Live Extra to NBC Sports Gold to now Peacock, is the number of games that are being featured exclusively through streaming keeps on increasing kind of time after time. So we're at 175 for next season. And who knows the final season of the current NBC deal, whether that number will increase to much more.
Now, I should point out Live Extra, because you have Xfinity, which is odd because it's, Comcast owns NBC. It was streaming for you. I have DirecTV, so I got all the games on spillover channels. So actually, Live Extra is something I miss. Although I know a lot of people I speak to say, it was just the same thing. It was free. But for people who had DirecTV, maybe DirecTV and Uverse were the only cable providers they made that deal with, but they actually got spillover channels on DirecTV.
And now, as far as the cons go, some of the negatives, there seem to be lots of teething problems. So, for example, on Wednesday morning, the app wasn't available on Google. It actually became available, I think, later in the morning. It was just really difficult to find. Also, there seemed to be no full-length replays available of the game. So if you missed them live, you could catch the highlights, but you couldn't actually see the full-length replays of that. It's still not available. Peacock is still not available on Roku or Amazon Fire TV. And this ended up becoming a big issue because if you tried to connect an external monitor to watch any of the games, it came up with an error message. It said, sorry, we've detected that you've got an external monitor and you cannot stream Peacock on it. Which for me is, not just for me, but for a lot of soccer fans, that was a major issue because if you're at work and you got two monitors, maybe you got one monitor for your emails and Microsoft Office and your work, and then you have an external monitor on the side where you could have a game on in the background kind of to watch. Or for me, personally, as I had Nottingham Forest against Swansea City on one of the screens on my monitor, and I wanted to watch the Peacock game at the same time on my laptop, you couldn't do it. From what I understand, it was intentional that they're doing it this way. It just is the first time I've ever experienced this from any streaming platform where they've stopped you from actually having it on an external monitor. It's absolutely crazy. Last but not least, it's in terms of the cons. Once you're in Peacock, it wasn't that easy to find where the Premier League games were. You would think it would be under the sports section, so you go into the sports section, and it was. I don't think it was even listed there in the morning. It was listed under channels, and then you had to scroll down quite a bit. So the UI of it isn't seamless, and I was surprised that they didn't actually promote the Premier League more heavily within Peacock. It just seemed to be kind of like, hey, you have to kind of hunt and peck to find it. What was your take, Kartik? Did you have any of the same experiences?
I had an experience on on the morning of yesterday, we're recording this Thursday morning, so Wednesday morning, the 15th, where I signed up for Peacock Premium weeks ago, and they didn't charge me until the 15th. So to preface everything, I have Peacock Premium, and I don't know if that means that I have less issues, less problems, a different layout than the rest of you. So just to preface what I'm saying, my monitor on my laptop, on one of my laptops, it said, hey, we're trying to determine whether you can have enhanced playback functions when I logged in. And it gave me that. Now, I didn't try and mirror it with another monitor, but it was working on there. On my iPad, where I ended up watching the games, and this, like I said, this was at 8 in the morning, and then when I turned it on at noon, the iPad straight through noon to 6, or actually till like 6:10. There was a racing show on after. It played straight through without any problems. Now, when I would go on the monitor, because there was a time I decided I would go back onto my laptop to try and pull another match, because remember at 1 Eastern there were simultaneous kickoffs. Then it kind of gave me some error message, and then I realized, okay, that's fine. I'm streaming it on another platform. I'm streaming it on another device, actually, so maybe it's blocking me from that. I don't know if that was the case or not, but I got an error message, and I said, okay, I'm not going to push it. Let me just go back to watching the Spurs match on the it was the Burnley Wolves match on the other device. So that was my experience. So I didn't have a problem, and as I said, this morning, or it's Thursday morning, the 16th, I've discovered the app on my smart TV, which will make today's Premier League matches easier to go back and forth between SN and Peacock on my television. There's also Serie A going on at the same time, so it'll be easier than having to go to my to another device.
Yeah, and hopefully some of these issues are things that they can work out and have, and also be added to Roku and be added to Amazon Fire TV sticks and etc. Because next season this is going to be front and center. I mean, like I said, 175 games out of the entire season. Hopefully by that point, well before that point, that Peacock will have its act together and make it more seamless, make it easier to use. And I think this is going to be the future. I mean, whether or not NBC is able to renew their deal that's going to be coming up for bid next year for the 22 season onwards, this is going to be a major part of NBC's play, is trying to get you to subscribe to Peacock. Now, there's a free version of Peacock that will not have the Premier League, and there's a Peacock Premium, like Kartik mentioned, which you can have a choice between $5 a month, or there's a which has commercials. There's a $10 a month, which doesn't have commercials. Or you have, if you have a Xfinity, if you're an Xfinity customer, it's free. But that's the way things are heading more and more. We've seen that.
Although I don't know if the deal is over, but I paid $49.99 for the year, which comes out to much cheaper.
Yeah.
For the
and I think that
free.
And I think that deal's already ended. So you're lucky to get in on that, Kartik, as far as getting the cost savings.
Because that is only, $50 divided by 12. I mean, that's not even $5 a month, really, right? Yeah. So I got a great deal.
As far as the other content, I don't know about you, but I looked through last night. I was like, okay, can I try and find something to watch? Is there anything of interest to me? This Brave New World, which is an original series that I was like, okay. I remember reading the Aldous Huxley book, and I thought, okay, this might be interesting. Let me add that to my watch list. I saw some Alfred Hitchcock movies. I thought, okay, that might be interesting. I've seen them all, but there wasn't, for me personally, there was hardly any other content that I would be interested in. I don't know about you, Kartik.
Yeah, whereas CBS All Access, remember, it is day one, but CBS All Access, which I hadn't really used until NWSL Challenge Cup rolled around, and have now been on it for the last few weeks. There were a lot of good movies. Now, I would say the inventory of movies they have matches the free movies you get on Amazon Prime or Hulu, right, that rotate in and out. But CBS All Access seems to have some of that same sort of catalog of older movies, which may be just kind of a shot, well, hey, you don't have to get Hulu if you don't need it, because if you signed up for this for live sports or news or whatever, or CBS dramas, we're also giving you this library of older movies. Now, Peacock would probably have libraries of movies that are Universal movies. Keep that in mind.
Yep.
So that's that's in a way kind of all-encompassing, you would think, but it also limits them. Just like Disney Plus. Disney Plus's catalog of movies is limiting because it's only Disney movies, and I think Peacock would be the Universal version of that. Now, historically, there have been more good Universal movies, at least from my perspective, than Disney movies. So there's probably going to be more on Peacock than Disney Plus in terms of older classic movies, but maybe still not the same amount as you get on Netflix, or certainly not on Netflix, but at Prime, Hulu, or All Access. I would put those in kind of the same tier as we compare them. All
right, so MLS is back. So interesting, Kartik, because of the way that MLS is producing MLS is back gives us an indication of where they are heading in the future and where they're at now, which is, and you noticed this too from Serie A, and we noticed it too also from the German Cup, the way that they're producing these games. So instead of having kind of their traditional format, which would be, say, two commentators on site, and then you've got a studio host, a presenter. Usually you might have about, including the actual commentators, maybe a team of 6 talent. The way that they're doing it now with MLS, and they've done before with Serie A of late, and with the German Cup, is two people. That's it. And it's the people in the studio. So you have John Champion in an unfamiliar role of being the host, live on ESPN, joined by his co-commentator, his analyst, Taylor Twellman. And it's interesting too, because it changes the way that we watch or experience the analysis of soccer games. Is that you have those two people with you pre-match, and then throughout the entire game doing the commentary and halftime and post-match. Do you feel like you miss out on anything, Kartik, or is this a winning formula?
I like, because ESPN, I like the ESPN FC studio. I feel like maybe we're missing out on something. But again, the guy that they would probably use in the studio would be Alejandro Moreno, who is tied up with other MLS Is Back matches working with Adrian Healy. So the studio would probably be Healy and Moreno. And because they're doing other matches, remember, as we said at the outset, we have this marathon of matches. I think in terms of MLS, it was impractical to have a separate. I mean, they could have Seb Salazar and Hercules Gomez or something like that. They could have some combination of that. But they
Craig Burley.
Or Craig Burley, right? They chose to go this route. Now they won't. They probably, the MLS fans don't want Burley on.
Right, exactly. That's why I left.
The Serie A, they've done the same thing. Where if it's a match, there was a match which Ross Dyer and Janusz Mikalik called this past week, where they were in a studio, and then the same thing with the Mark Donaldson, Matteo Benetti matches, or the Adrian Healy, Craig Burley matches. That's an interesting approach. I mean, for me, the most interesting part of MLS Is Back's TV coverage, maybe we can get to this in a minute, has been the camera work, which...
Okay, Kartik.
I understand this is very controversial.
Well, so tell me about this. So for example, before we go into it, I was on the media conference call where I read the press releases, and I heard the producers at ESPN talking about all these kind of experimental camera angles and all of these things that they would be doing. And I've been watching a lot of the games, not as many games as you, but what am I missing? I mean, to me, it doesn't feel that much different than a normal La Liga game. Or, what is so different about this than other leagues?
So I think it's again a matter of personal preferences, because I understand the greater chunk of people who watch European football in this country, who particularly the Premier League, don't go to live soccer matches. They're not sitting in the stands or in the press box like me, watching at this kind of angle, which is different than. So, the thing for me is you get to see players move off the ball, and a lot of player movement things that if you're watching the Premier League, you don't get those angles, but then you have a co-commentator. When Stu Robson is the co-commentator, he's telling you what's going on. A lot of times the co-commentator is not telling you what's going on. So these camera angles are kind of wider views, full kind of pitch side. The camera work, they're switching angles consistently, but what you're seeing is that you're getting more of the pitch, because what it is, and we've talked about this before on the show, Chris, most MLS fans, MLS doesn't have any TV fans, right? Their TV fans are basically people who go to games, and they're watching their team when they're away from home, right? So basically, because this tournament is in Orlando, it's behind closed doors, they're trying to replicate the fan stands experience. Like right now, as we're taping this, Atlanta's playing Cincinnati, and there are more wide views and kind of top views that the kind of angles that you can have in FIFA if you play FIFA and you never use, right? Because it's difficult to play with those angles. Than you would in a normal soccer broadcast. And what it's giving you is some sense of what guys are doing off the ball, what player movement is happening off the ball, which is exciting for people who go to live games. Now, I will say the flip side of it is you're not getting as many close-up angles or kind of traditional TV coverage of action that you would get in a normal Premier League or Bundesliga or Serie A match. So I'll give you the example of the San Jose-Vancouver game, the counterattack, which was launched by Vancouver, and they scored. The second goal ended up being an own goal, but it was a perfect counterattack until it was perfect still because San Jose's defender put the ball in their own net past Daniel Vega, their keeper. But that entire sequence was shot from a wide angle where you saw the defenders track back, all three defenders, and the two San Jose attackers, what they were doing, and you saw what the keeper was doing, what Vega was doing. But if you watch a counterattack like that, like the clinical counterattacks we've seen from Chelsea at times and Liverpool at times this season in the Premier League, there'll always be kind of a close-up side angle where you see Mane running with the ball and you can see Salah in the background or whoever making the run and the defender tracking back. This was from a completely different angle. Again, it's personal preferences. I fell in love with it. I mean, I got the press release and the media call and everything, and was saying, what's the big deal? It was the Philly New York game, one of the first matches of the tournament, that made me fall in love with these camera views, because I was like, oh yeah, this is like actually being there for those of us who are used to being at matches. But again, people who just watch soccer on television, it's probably, I would have guessed for them, a lot of them, it's probably annoying.
Well, to me, it's not annoying. I just can't really, and I'm watching actually as we're recording this, and I'm actually watching the Atlanta against Cincinnati game. I'm watching it, so there's definitely more cameras kind of on the touchline, so you see more close-ups from that. But other than that, I don't see that much of a difference. I mean, in terms of before the tournament, they were talking about drones and experimental things, and I just haven't seen that as much. I mean, I've seen kind of the view from the helicopter, kind of the Philadelphia goal against Inter Miami. Those things are different. But me watching the games, I haven't seen as many what was kind of almost seemed to be revolutionary camera work. It just seems to me like just a very, very similar to kind of your La Liga or Premier League games, and that's not a negative. That's a positive. The other thing about it too, Kartik, is just that the main camera, whenever the ball is near the touchline, below the main camera, oftentimes the main camera can't even pick up what's happening on the pitch, so you don't even see that. So then you have to rely on the touchline camera.
That has been an issue. That's absolutely been the biggest issue, I think, in the camera work in this tournament. The San Jose goal I mentioned yesterday, the Vancouver goal I mentioned yesterday, was one of those examples of whether that was a helicopter or a drone. They've had enough of those views to satisfy me, and I love them. But you're right. I guess the majority of camera work is no different than a typical La Liga match. But they have these kind of these views they go to, and it allows me, as someone who likes to watch and understand what guys are doing off the ball, whether they have a good work rate, whether they're making smart runs, or whether they're just standing around. Which, in the case of some of these defenders, a lot of these defenders in MLS, unfortunately, happens. It's giving me a better insight into that. But yeah, that idea that there's a little area that's cut off, right, and that's off camera, close to the touchline, and that's an issue, and that's been an issue in the entire tournament. Yeah, and it's an issue in the match we're watching as we record live, right? This Atlanta Cincinnati match.
Yeah, and I think as games have gone on, it's been better where they've had the sideline cameras, like the guys, handheld cameras right alongside the pitch, trying to pick up any of the action that's happening right along that touchline. So that's been better. The very first game, which was the Orlando Miami game, it was pretty bad in terms of that, but it's not the end of the world by any means. But overall, I would say the television production's been good. Overall, the production of the games has been fantastic in terms of, everything from the those virtual boards. I'd like to see more of the fans, because you only pretty much see them kind of behind the goal sometimes, or when the camera kind of goes up a little bit and you see it above the advertising. But overall, I think they've done a good job. The quality of play, Kartik, I just find Major League Soccer is overly physical, and at the same time, there's just poor refereeing. It seems that players can get away with so much more in these games where there's decisions where it's definitely a yellow card, and it's just a warning, and I'm like, and it happens repeatedly, and these games seem to be much more physical than a typical game from anywhere around the world, especially Europe.
Yeah, I would agree on the refereeing, and there have been some real controversial, I would say, mistakes in this tournament. I think physicality comes with MLS, and that's something that if you watch MLS, you're used to and you expect. The big talking point, I think, on the refereeing is VAR. So there are people who are watching, although the ratings don't necessarily tell us this, but I know there are people who are watching MLS this tournament who normally just watch the Premier League. And they're seeing the implementation of VAR completely differently in MLS. And this goes back, and we've talked a lot about Stuart Robson already. I guess he's the theme of this podcast. Maybe it's the Stuart Robson podcast. That's our working title this week. But yeah. Stuart Robson had pointed out very early on, and I guess he doesn't like Mike Riley, right? But the difference between Howard Webb, who was a Premier League official forever, and Mike Riley, and how they and Howard Webb's now the head of officials in MLS, for those who don't know, and how they took this very different approach to VAR. So Riley wanted to check everything, right?
Yeah.
And make sure they got everything right. Webb, and I actually sat and interviewed Howard Webb when he put in place these protocols now more than 3 years ago. And Webb's view was he didn't want to break up the natural flow of a match, right? So basically, if it's a clear and obvious error, they will stop the match. So I think it gives you more free-flowing football in MLS than you have in the Premier League. The Premier League is very annoying with all its stops, but there are also still a great number of mistakes being made in MLS that actually they're suing in the Premier League by VAR, but you know what I mean. You know what I'm saying.
Yeah, as far as the way that MLS does VAR, I like that. And not oftentimes, but sometimes in games there are decisions where I'm like, I want to see that again, because that one looked like he was onside. It didn't look like he was offside. But then you have to trust in VAR and the VAR official.
Like the first LAFC goal, right, the other night against Houston was clearly offside.
Yeah.
But
even
Webb's directive is get on with the game.
Right, and even the Philly-Miami game, there was an instance in the first half where Philly looked like the guy was onside, but he was ruled offside by the assistant referee. But I'd like to see that again. I'd like to see VAR kind of look at that more closely, or give us a replay to show, evidence-wise, with the lines or whatever. But at least the game was flowing. It didn't. It wasn't the stop-start nature that we're accustomed to in the Premier League. The worrying thing, though, Kartik, about this whole thing too, is that FIFA and Gianni Infantino says that he wants to have a VAR kind of standard that's used globally. It's the same standard for everyone. So which path they go down, which is many different paths to choose from as far as all the leagues are doing things differently, it's still too early. To me, at this point, it hasn't been perfected by any means, not even close to it. That's worrying, because and
the Premier League doesn't seem to be able to grasp the importance, if they're going to stop constantly, of getting the call right. Because I think what's happening is it's just added another layer of subjectivity, and the matches stop constantly in the Premier League. I mean, and honestly, Germany and Italy have now had VAR for longer than the Premier League, and they don't have all of these stoppages that the Premier League has. And as we said, MLS has virtually no stoppages. Maybe MLS needs more stoppages. I don't know, because again, Webb has a very high standard where he wants to keep the game flowing, and it makes me think that might be even the standard. Maybe this is why there was some sort of decision by Howard Webb, who was the preeminent official in England, to move to the United States. I guess he has just a very different view of this thing than Mike Riley, who is the head of officials, who was technically Howard Webb's boss in England had. And it's fascinating to see the contrast. I'm hoping that if we have a unified standard that Infantino puts in place, it does not look like what the Premier League does, because or maybe they'll figure it out eventually. But I was hopeful with the COVID break we'd come back and VAR wouldn't be as big of an issue in the Premier League. If anything, it's become an even bigger issue, right? I mean, it's like it overshadows everything. And I mean, which NBC broadcast was it where afterwards Rebecca Lowe and Musto and Earl, after about 15 minutes, were like, okay, we're going to talk about the match. It was something since the restart. We've spent the first 15 minutes talking about VAR again. The
Spurs game, I think, where Lucas Moura got pushed Sheffield United. And that became, it was such a bad game anyway, but that was kind of the only instance, the talking point. I mean, and they could have spent I think they probably spent like a good 45 minutes on that.
Well, they were on their way, and then I guess maybe someone put a bug in her ear and said, hey, let's talk about the game. But it literally was 15 minutes, I want to say.
Oh, at least.
They were only talking about VAR.
So before we talk about ESPN's coverage and compared to Fox's coverage of MLS Is Back, which I know you've got some strong thoughts on, I just want to mention too, Kartik, it is so frustrating and so annoying too, and this has been going on forever, is the kickoff times with MLS Is Back. So when it's an 8 o'clock kickoff and it doesn't start till 8:45, when it says it's a 9 o'clock kickoff and it doesn't start till, I don't know, 9:15, 9:30, or worse, when it's a 10:30 Eastern time kickoff and you're not starting until almost 11 o'clock Eastern time. That's frustrating because you're either staying up late or getting up early. Depending on which time zone you're on, and you're hoping you're timing things sometimes based on that to make other plans, and the kickoff times are kind of just being shifted. As is MLS and US soccer, they love to do. Just really frustrating with that.
Yeah, I agree with that, and it's now to the point where it's not just frustrating; it's annoying. I do not know when to turn on a match, and I will freely admit this. I guess this is a good segue. If a match is a John Champion Taylor Twellman match, okay, I'm turning it on at 9 a.m. I'm turning it on at 8 p.m. I'm turning it on at 10:30, whatever the listed time is on ESPN. Or same thing with Moreno and Healy. They're doing a good job. If it's a Fox match or a 2DNA match, I'm trying to get whatever else I'm doing, cram it into the 10 or 15 minutes, and sometimes the kickoff is like 8:12. It's 8:17. So that's frustrating, and I think that's a general thing with American sports in general. Tip-off times, kickoff times are not the time that's synchronized. And I think the other thing about this tournament that to me has been so interesting, and I just want to point this out in deference to MLS or in support of MLS. You and I have talked for years about how MLS regular season matches mean nothing, right? Mm-hmm. And how it's very difficult to watch. And every season, you and I will watch the league the first week or two, pick up on TV trends, and then kind of put it away until after Bundesliga, Premier League, Serie A, La Liga are done, and then the international tournaments are done, and then maybe start watching it again in September. I have had to say, you talked about the physicality of these games, the sense of urgency, and this goes back, this just tells us what happens if something's on the line. The sense of urgency and intensity in these matches, I know there are people who will argue with me in defense of the MLS regular season. It's night and day between this tournament and what we normally see in MLS.
I agree.
This has been, guys have been going after it, and it's been fun. That's why I've watched every minute.
The only thing I'm missing, though, Kartik, and I agree with you, this is more meaningful and this is more interesting to watch than the regular season, kind of, which seems like just a long, arduous kind of journey. But this is definitely more interesting, and it'd be great if this in the future they said, okay, instead of the regular season, we're just going to have a tournament, and we're going to figure out which teams are actually going to make the playoffs based on this tournament, and we're going to make it more exciting. This I like it. They're probably not going to do that, but
that's the reason there have been so many stoppage time goals too. By the way, in this tournament, is like teams are not settling for points, right? They're going for 3 points.
The only thing that's missing, I think, is just the those star players. So there's a lot of teams that are very, very equal in team wise. There's a lot of quality there. some teams better than others, and there's a lot of good team play, good team chemistry. But it's missing those individual stars that are going to take a 0-0 that's going into the last 5 or 10 minutes and do something incredible. Just do something absolutely creative that's going to blow your socks off. And I think that's what's missing is that. It doesn't have to be a European star. It doesn't have to be a Zlatan, although that would be nice. But there's enough talent around the world, I'm sure, from South America to bring them into these games to turn them into stars.
The guy at MLS who can do that is injured. It's Joseph Martinez.
Right.
So that's really kind of a bad break for the league because he is that guy. I can't think of anyone readily in the league besides him who's here because obviously Vela is not here and Chicharito
is not the same. But that's the thing, though. Like
really rough.
Each of those teams needs that one guy, that star player that you tune in to go like, oh man, this guy is amazing. I'm going to watch this guy.
This is interesting. MLS, I think, much like the Premier League has done the last several years, has tried to make the coaches more celebrities. So particularly Thierry Henry and Jaap Stam, who are huge names in world football, they have tried to market the heck out of. That's I don't know if it'll pay off in this tournament, but it's something the Premier League did for years, and it worked for the Premier League. It's something leagues like the Bundesliga have never quite gotten a grasp on to how to market their managers. And in Italy, the managers aren't there long enough to market them, right? In Spain, they're not there long enough. But I noticed that there's been just a lot more focus specifically on those two guys, but on some of the other managers also during this, even Oscar Pereira of Orlando. I think that might be where they're going with the superstar strategy because, Thierry Henry and Jaap Stam are global superstars in this sport. Are they good managers? We don't know that yet, but they are people to market.
Yeah, and both of those are quality players of old, and I have no interest in hearing from them. I have interest in them doing well with their teams, but that's not going to make me tune into a game. That's not going to pull me in closer to MLS games. I'm looking for the quality on the field and looking for those individual players that are going to shine. Those players that could be, in 1 or 2 years going on to join a Bundesliga club, or it's Alphonso Davies, or these types of star players. And I'm not seeing that for the most part. I am seeing actually now and again that I'll see 1 or 2 players, but for the most part, it's very equal. They kind of both teams are going at each other, and there's really no standout players. But overall, I've been impressed, and my expectations were probably low for this tournament going into it, and coming out of it so far, what I've seen thus far, I've been impressed. Now, Kartik, let's go back to our topic that we're going to talk about is Fox's coverage of MLS Is Back. There hasn't been a lot. Most of these games are on ESPN. Tudo Enes had some exclusives too, but Fox not so much. They have had some. What's your take on what you've seen from Fox?
Yeah, so first off, they're piping in crowd noise, which and so is Tudo Enes, which I guess people have gotten used to from the Premier League. Although a lot of people tell me, they keep asking me, hey, where can I get the clean feed for the Premier League? And I'll tell them they have to go online to the NBC Sports app, etc. That took away one of the great, and we didn't mention this earlier, one of the great things I've liked about MLS Is Back is that I'm hearing all the players communicate. Now, one thing that's been noticeable is so many of the players communicate in Spanish and not in English in MLS with one another. And the second thing we picked up from the ESPN microphones is that they're always talking kind of tactics to one another, space, etc. The sort of things that really kind of I geek out on. Not getting that on Fox. Secondly, it's a high standard when you're talking about John Champion and Taylor Twellman, arguably the best broadcast duo in the English language, right? Anywhere in the world. But Fox is just, as much as I like John Strong and I really like Stu Holden as a color commentator, they're just not up to that standard, right? They don't talk about the same things. They don't talk about the game in the same way. I do have a friend who told me he was a Premier League fan, one of these people who doesn't normally watch MLS, who watched Champion and Twellman for a few matches and says maybe they're just showing off. They're so good, right? They're showing off all their knowledge because Twellman will bring in something random from the Bundesliga or another league in Europe, and Champion will always lean on his experience calling English football and Champions League in the past, UEFA Champions League. But they're just at a totally different level than the strong Holden duo. Then you go to the studio with Rob Stone, and it's just not the same thing, right? I mean, there's just this huge drop off in coverage. So it's very much like acceptable coverage for MLS in 2015, what Fox presents you. But is it acceptable coverage now that ESPN has brought John Champion over from England? Now that Taylor Twellman is one of the best, if not the best, co-commentator in the English language anywhere in the world? Is it okay when ESPN's graphics are kind of subtle and complimentary, that Fox has all these kind of crazy graphics going on, all these crazy things going on? Is it okay on 2DNA? This is now not on Fox, on 2DNA, that they seem to be overcalling games, right? Yeah. They don't. There's no breathing room. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure. I think this tournament has just kind of, and I know ESPN's doing a lot of the production for the other two networks too, but in the way that they present the match, I think there's now just greater separation between ESPN and the other two broadcasters for MLS.
Yeah, I've got a different take on this. So my personal experience and my personal feelings when I'm watching this is that I've actually grown a little bit burned out on the John Champion Taylor Twellman duo. I like both of them. Both of them are very smart, very good with their analysis, very good at their games. But I've almost every single game I've watched of ESPN, it's been the same two guys. I've missed the last few games, so I think there've been some variety now. There's some Healy
Moreno, but it's still mostly Twellman. It's mostly Champion Twellman.
Yeah, I want to see Seb Salazar. I want to see, I don't know, Julie Foudy, or I want to mix it up a little bit. Maybe. Yeah, absolutely. So now going back to Fox and Tudoene, the crowd noise I'm okay with, and I personally, from my experience, I think that what we were expecting and what we're getting on the ESPN noise, the actual audio, is overrated. So yes, for the first couple of games, I was like, wow, that's great. We can hear them speaking mostly Spanish, or in one of the Miami games, a lot of F-bombs getting bleeped out, and then just hearing the communication between the players. But after a while, I was like, okay, this is just the same stuff over and over again. There's nothing new here, except once in a while you can hear the coaches and listen in on what they're saying, which adds a whole different dynamic. That's something we haven't heard before, we haven't seen before during the water breaks. But for the most part, I'm okay with the crowd noise, just because on the Fox and Tudoene, it's more in the background. It's not as obnoxious as what the Premier League is doing, where it's really kind of in your face and not in sync with the games itself. From Fox's perspective, I mean, they had the commercials during the water breaks. I'm okay with that. You had John Strong and Stu Holden doing the commentary. I'm okay with that too. And I think... And also the interviews with the coaches during the water breaks, I'm okay with that too. But what I do find completely obnoxious and a clown show is Fox's studio kind of analysis, and I think part of it too is that's Fox's style, where they're trying to be obnoxious and bright and kind of just like all American, just like just kind of getting out there and just saying stupid things and just playing off each other, just turn of phrases and just laughing and giggling, and it's all fun, it's all soccer, it's all like go USA. And it's a complete opposite of what ESPN is doing, which ESPN's coverage is a lot more intelligent, it's a lot more thoughtful, it's a lot more interesting, it's a lot more engaging. Fox is just absolutely just typical Fox. It's just, and I think part of it though too is, to me, is like this is the same Alexi Lalas who was with ESPN during the World Cup, 2014. It was the shining star in some of the Euros with Michael Ballack, giving some really thoughtful, intelligent, like really hardcore, great analysis and discussion and debate, and you got the best out of Lalas. I mean, to me, at this point, while I respect Lalas for being somebody who plays the game and is smart and intelligent, he's really reduced his value as somebody, as an analyst.
But the thing about Lawless is he doesn't, in defense of him, he does not act that way when he's not broadcasting MLS or the U.S. national team. I mean, I found his studio.
But that's all he does.
Yeah, no. But when he did the Bundesliga prior to them ramping down, that's why I think I wrote a column once: "Good Lawless versus Bad Lawless." I mean, you'd watch him in the morning on the Bundesliga, and he'd be giving like this fantastic studio analysis about things that were going on in the match. And tactical considerations and psychological considerations, and then you get to the primetime game in MLS, and it was like, what's he talking about? It's not the same guy.
But that's the thing.
8 hours between games.
But that's the thing, though, too, is Lawless eats that up. He loves it, whether you love him or hate him, as long as you talk about him, and which we are right now. But the reality is, I think at the end of the day, though, that helps his Twitter profile, but it does not help the TV ratings. I mean, when people see that it's Lawless, I believe that people will switch that channel or turn it off or go to something else, just because they've gotten so sick and tired of years and years now, since 2015 or so, of just BS. I mean, when it is MLS or US games, and when it's a Bundesliga, yes, it's different. To me, and I asked him this when we interviewed him, is like, who is the real Alexi Lalas? And he answered us and said, well, who's the real Kartik and who's the real Chris? We're all putting on a show, which I got pissed off about, because we're not putting on a show. This is the real me, Kartik. This is the real you. We're not, pretending to be something that we're not. Lawless is pretending. And the Lawless that we see on these MLS broadcasts, I don't think is the real Lawless. I think he's just playing a role. And he does it well within that Fox environment, but it just devalues his analysis, devalues him as a professional. All right, let's move on to TV streaming news, Kartik.
Yeah, so our first story of the week is IMG, and we know CBS obviously now has the rights to the Champions League and Europa League beginning immediately. IMG is pursuing CBS's production of UCL, and these decisions have to be made quickly. IMG produces the weekly magazine show that we all, well, I shouldn't say we all watch, but a lot of us watch for the Champions League weekly show. They could do a quick turnkey operation for CBS using their production studios. They're based in London, etc. If CBS does this, they're going to have to make the decision to do this like now, right, in the next few days. But CBS is under the gun, and this might provide a short-term solution that makes sense for them. And it may not be the best type of kind of Americanized coverage some of you might be looking for, but it probably would be very professionally done and very tastefully done.
So behind the scenes, I've been having discussions with executives with CBS, but also some of my sources. And from what I'm hearing, it's positive. I mean, the things that they're talking about, the things that they're thinking about the coverage of the UEFA Champions League, I'm excited about. Now, whether or not they can pull it off, we'll have to wait and see. But so far, so good. And I think, too, for these next few games or the next few rounds of the UEFA Champions League and the Europa League, starting in early August and ending at, August 23rd, I think, is the final, is that... that's going to be probably IMG taking a role and CBS not having as major of a role. And then for the next season, then too, when the season starts up in September, October, then I think we'll see the real CBS and what they do. But so far, so good. What wasn't good, though, unfortunately, Kartik, was the draw for the UEFA Champions League and the Europa League. And many people caught this on social media too, kind of Thomas Rongen giving some really poor analysis about Atalanta and RB Leipzig. And not only that, but then CBS, I think, Sports going ahead and actually tweeting that out, not catching it themselves. So hopefully it's just a poor mistake, kind of beginner's mistakes, and hopefully those things will be rectified in the future.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Let me go ahead. The next point of news is the debut trailer for the Ted Lasso TV series has dropped. Ted Lasso will premiere globally with the first 3 episodes on Apple TV Plus on Friday, August the 14th. Following the premiere, new episodes will debut weekly on Fridays, thereafter on the streaming service. Now, Kartik, I do not have Apple TV Plus. I'm not sure if you do, but
I do.
You do. All right. So, did you see the trailer for this one?
Yes, I did. And the thing that Apple TV Plus has done previously is that they, or at least the things I've watched on there, like the morning show, the show with Jennifer Aniston and Reese Witherspoon, that they have allowed you to binge, right? They've released them all at once. The thing that I found unique about this was that they're doing 3 episodes and then once a week. The trailer looks like, the NBCSN commercials from a few years ago. To those of us who watch that, I think probably everyone listening is aware of that. That's nothing new. But now seeing it in a full kind of hour-long or however long the show is going to be format, I think is pretty exciting. I'm really looking forward to it. But yes, I have Apple TV Plus. If you don't have Apple TV Plus, there are ways of getting it without paying a lot. If you don't, no, I'll say if you buy a new iPhone or buy a new iPad this year, between now and August 14th, you'll get it for free. Now, if you don't, and you're already on Apple devices and iOS devices, you'll have to pay. But you'll also get a lot of other enhancements, like the new Tom Hanks movie Greyhound, which
that looks amazing.
I've already downloaded to watch on Apple TV Plus. I haven't watched it yet, but we'll probably watch this weekend. Once there's some slowdown in soccer, I'm going to watch it.
Right.
I downloaded it the first day that it came out, which is a week ago now, and still have not so much as started it. But there are some perks to it. So yeah, this is really exciting, and it's a soccer show. So I'm excited about it.
Yeah, and you scared me for a minute ago because you were talking about there are ways to watch this for free. I thought you were going to talk about illegal streaming.
Illegal streaming. Right?
But I don't know. To me, I enjoy the trailer. When I see stuff like this, I smile, I laugh. I think it's funny. If somebody was watching this from Great Britain, they probably would think like, what's funny about this? But it is very much a kind of an American take on a lot of stereotypes about the UK, and I might actually go ahead and give Apple TV Plus a trial when this comes out in August, and to see if because it's a series, right? So it's is it gonna hook you week after week? I mean, there's a lot of it reminds me a lot of Austin Powers, kind of just a North American take on kind of making fun of British things, and also kind of the differences and similarities between the UK and American cultures. But I don't know. I think it's funny. I think it's a good idea, and it'll be I'll give it a shot. What the heck? And Kartik, one more news item before we move on to the next segment.
Yeah, so this week we learned about what the start times would be for the 2022 World Cup group stage in Qatar. There will be 4 matches per day, which is a little different than the past when we've had 3 matches per day, except in the third group stage matches. And kickoff times are as follows in Eastern time: 5 a.m., 8 a.m., 11 a.m., and 2 p.m. So the 5 a.m. is pretty problematic. The rest are doable, but that's for the East Coast. The West Coast, 2 a.m., 5 a.m., 8 a.m., 11 a.m. So about half the tournament, it's going to be very difficult to watch on the West Coast. Yeah,
so for Fox and Telemundo, this is going to be a Herculean kind of attempt to try to get any decent ratings out of this. I mean, even the final, I think it's at 10 a.m. Eastern time, 7 a.m. Pacific time.
Although it was early this past time, too, remember?
That's true.
From Russia.
That's true. But it's going to be difficult. I mean, the 5. So on the East Coast, I will wake up for a 5 a.m. and 8 a.m. and 11 a.m. games and 2 p.m. no problem. If I was on the West Coast, it's like, why even bother going to sleep? But the first game's at 2 a.m.
The reason they're doing this, okay, and it's not time zone related. It's related to the fact that they're trying to cram this World Cup in the winter, in the middle of a club season. So they have to have 4 group stage games a day, and that's essentially creating the problem, because the 8 a.m. on the East Coast is not that much different than what we've gotten when the World Cup has been in Russia or in South Africa or in Germany, right? It would be 9 a.m. instead. But this is, again, a byproduct of a Winter World Cup. Now, I was optimistic that maybe there would be some wholesale change to the calendar because we've had COVID and there's been such a disruption to football in general that maybe this would allow them to reposition this. But I guess they're still set on the calendar being what it is for 2022, and they're still set on this Club World Cup competition in the summer of 2021, and so they're going to force what they're going to force.
So, Kartik, you know more about traditional American sports than I do. I know absolutely nothing. But those days for that 2022 World Cup, so it begins November 21st and goes through all the way till, December 18th. So in terms of your NFL world, your college football world, your other sports, how many conflicts are you going to get in that time of the year?
So it'll be NFL and college football. That's it. Well, you have the NBA and NHL regular seasons, but they're early in their regular seasons. And you've got golf that has now shortened their season. Although, again, things have been disrupted by COVID, so maybe the calendar gets realigned for that sport also. But had shortened their season, and Ryder Cup, President's Cup, all of that's over by then. Yeah, it's really college football and NFL, the beginning of college basketball. That's it. But the problem with it is it's the business end of those two seasons, particularly college football, that you're competing with. The one break is the knockout stage coincides with the period where college football's regular season and conference championship games have ended and the big bowl games haven't started yet. So that's one slight break, but the group stage is going to be brutal going up against the NFL and college football. Yeah,
and I guess with the time zones, it in some ways it does work out where you have most of the games finished by 1 p.m. Eastern. Well, I guess for college football, that's not a good fit. But for NFL, though, I'm thinking of those games that you could have almost back-to-back, where you have some of the games, maybe say a 10 a.m. Eastern game in the World Cup in the latter stages of the tournament that's over by noon, and then you've got NFL starting up from noon onwards with some of those NFL games. So there's some opportunities. At least it's not a direct clash at the same exact times as some of these games. But we've got the full schedule at worldsoccertalk.com if you want to check it out, and it's got all the different kickoff times. Of course, we don't know who the teams were going to be yet, but it's a good read. All right, Kartik, let's move on to TV ratings. And this one, usually we skip over this section pretty quickly, but this one I want to dive into a little bit deeper, just because there hasn't been a lot of discussion about the TV ratings for MLS Is Back. And that gives an indication of what the feeling is within the, I guess, US soccer journalism world, is they're pretty much ignoring it. And is that for a reason? Because the numbers, well, let's talk about that. So a few weeks ago, before the MLS Is Back tournament started, you and I had the discussion on this podcast talking about the TV ratings and talking about how this MLS Is Back competition would give us more clarity on who's watching these games, who's interested in Major League Soccer. Is it your casual sports fan who is into the NBA, into NFL, has a college football team, and watches MLS on the side? Or is it an audience of hardcore MLS fans who, like you mentioned, goes to the games, but with them being no games, with no fans, what would those numbers tell us about that? So there's a lot of different things to look at with this. And first of all, let me turn it over to you. We've got the numbers in front of us. We can share some of those numbers with the listeners. But what do the numbers tell you that you've seen thus far that we have here?
What they've told me is it's just the same viewers plus a few more kind of soccer fans who are Premier League fans, etc. What I had been hopeful of was that they would have a huge bump from American sports fans who don't have American sports going on right now, and we have not seen that. But what I'm pleased about is that we're seeing kind of more core soccer fans that are Premier League. They're probably Premier League, right? They're not Bundesliga. There's not that many Bundesliga and Serie A fans when it comes down to it in this country that have have made kind of the really low, other than the 9 a.m. kickoffs, right? Those just naturally have lower ratings, but the primetime games, we don't have the kind of unevenness sometimes we have during the regular season. So they are slightly up from previous primetime ratings in regular seasons because of those core soccer fans. But so I guess it's just been very average, Chris. I mean, I had this huge hope that American sports fans, because MLS was back, was the first American pro sports league back, they would be watching MLS, they'd be watching soccer. Hasn't happened. But I was also fearful for MLS that because it was going on at the same time as the Premier League, Serie A, and La Liga, that there would be a huge drop-off in ratings. That hasn't happened either. So I guess it's just kind of the happy medium or the unhappy medium, depending on your perspective. Yeah,
and the same thing that happened with the Bundesliga too, because when the Bundesliga started up back in mid-May, I was disappointed with those numbers. I'm like, what the heck are people watching? Like, American sports fans are saying, like, I want to watch sports, and you have sports that are shown on, yes, it's FS1 and FS2, it's not ESPN, but those numbers were better than what they usually are, but they weren't through the roof. And I was like, okay, so what is it about the Bundesliga? Is it Fox's promotion or lack thereof that is hurting those numbers? Now we have the MLS numbers, and so for listeners, the two outliers, the two numbers that are important to mention, but are not a representation of what we've seen across the board, are the opening game, which is Orlando against Miami, Wednesday, July 8th, in prime time on ESPN, 8 p.m. Eastern. A lot of anticipation, no matter if you're not an Orlando or Miami fan. A lot of people wanting to tune into this to see about this tournament. Like, what is this tournament going to look like? What's Miami going to look like? Yes, it's a Florida derby, but for the most part, there was the curiosity. So that viewership for that number on ESPN and ESPN Deportes combined was 492,000 viewers for that. So decent, definitely decent, not bad, a good start. The other number to throw out there too is the number that was on Fox, on over-the-air Fox, prime time on a Saturday night, 8 p.m. Eastern. One of the best teams in the league, Atlanta United against New York Red Bulls. And the Red Bulls is a decent team too, definitely. So this one, 587,000 viewers on this one, on the English language Fox side. On the Spanish language, TUDN, 52,000 people. So collectively combined, 637,000 approximately. So a decent number, nothing through the roof, nothing appalling, but it is what it is. The other numbers, though, Kartik, I mean, from the ESPN, so up until a couple of days ago, the number that was thrown out there is that ESPN is currently averaging 337,000 viewers across ESPN and ESPN Deportes. My concern is that there's still very little sports on American television. Yes, you've got NWSL, which was the first sports league back, but the vast majority of those games, 98% of those games are on OTT behind a paywall. So on television, though, we've got soccer. We've got soccer on prime time on ESPN most evenings. Yes, there's the early game too to see what those numbers were like. But I'm disappointed. And it's hard to tell, Kartik, whether this is just American sports fans just like, soccer? Like, who would want to watch that?
Yeah, no, I've gotten some of that. I've seen some of that. And that there's been some dismissive comments from American sports fans about soccer. You know, it's MLS, but soccer. Why is ESPN showing this stuff all day? They'd be better off showing every night. They'd be better off showing replays of some college football game. I've seen a few tweets like that, and actually, I'm in a chat group where someone made that comment yesterday, saying, "Oh, this is," or not yesterday. Last time ESPN had primetime games, whichever day that was, and because last night was 2DNA, this is ridiculous. Why are they showing all this soccer? it's so disturbing. I tweeted earlier in the week, and Taylor Twellman retweeted and it went all over the place. My anger at cable news channels, CNN, MSNBC, Fox, who act like the NBA is the first league back, and that this thing they're doing in the bubble is something revolutionary. As if NWSL hadn't done it first a month earlier, and MLS isn't doing it currently in the same place the NBA is. I don't know what it takes sometimes for us to get respect for this sport. I'm very frustrated by that. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, me too. Because I posted something on Twitter too that got a lot of retweets, and I was saying that I'm pissed off at the number of people I hear or speak with that say, I can't wait for sports to be back. And I'm like, sports have been back since middle of May. You've had the Bundesliga, and now you have Major League Soccer, and you've had the Premier League, you've got La Liga, you've got Serie A, and a lot of these games are being featured on your flagship sports network. So Twellman says, okay, he retweets and says, okay, MSNBC, CNN, and I agree with you, Kartik, is that the mainstream news media needs to be more conscious of soccer and sports being back on, but they're either completely, just don't know what's going on in life, or they're intentionally ignoring soccer.
They may be intentionally doing it, because I'm telling you, in the case of CNN, they've had Commissioner Garber on to talk about MLS is back, and then the next hour, whoever the anchor is will be like, oh, the NBA will be the first one. Or they don't say that directly, but they pretend like nothing's happening with soccer. So there is an editorial bias in major newsrooms around this country against our sport still.
Yeah.
It may not be as bad as it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago, but it's still there. That I've picked up on the last few weeks.
Yeah, it's a huge obstacle. Having said that, though, Kartik, these numbers are not impressive, the other numbers. So I'm looking at FS1 numbers are about the same as what they are usually during a normal season. They're in the hundreds of thousands. In 100 plus thousand. You had Cincinnati against Columbus. Yeah, it was a late game. Oh, that one was really late. That was 104,000 people watched that one. You had LAFC, kind of one of the dream teams in MLS, against Houston on Monday in prime time, 8 p.m. Eastern start time. 164,000 people watched that one. And LA Galaxy against Portland, two big teams, 202,000 viewers on FS1 for a late game on Monday. So those numbers aren't, to me, what it's telling me is that MLS is really, that's the peak. You're not, MLS's hope going into this tournament, and the reason that MLS pushed so hard to make this tournament happen is because, one, financial reasons. They need to have, to be able to fulfill the contractual obligations with advertisers, sponsors, all these, the TV companies. They have to have a product to be able to show, to be able to bring that money in. But second of all is
local sponsors also, which I want to point out, they've done a great job highlighting local sponsors.
Absolutely.
Phenomenal.
The sponsorship and advertising side of things, the way that they've really, it's been a home run as far as the way that they've been able to get that front and center. They've done a really good job, and I'm sure the sponsors and advertisers are happy with that. But the second main reason to do this and push so hard was that this was the opportunity for Major League Soccer, for the first time ever, to have games on when there's no other sports happening. There's no other traditional American sports. And I think that the thinking going into this tournament is that, hey, there's no baseball on, there's no NBA on, there's no college football or American football. Here is our chance. Here is our opportunity to go ahead and have games on, over the air television, but also on ESPN, on the flagship channel, and have soccer on almost throughout the day, between MLS and Serie A in the afternoon and another MLS game at night. And these numbers tell me that America's not interested.
Yeah, the Serie A numbers have been disappointing too, to be honest with you. I thought those games being on flagship ESPN, the volume of Serie A matches they're showing would make a massive difference in the profile of that league, and it just hasn't happened. And with MLS, I've heard, I went from saying, oh gosh, maybe it's just not, MLS isn't doing a good job, to realizing, oh, it's not because of MLS, it's just there's just still this inherent bias against soccer in this country, which I thought we were past. Now, maybe I was being naive and overly optimistic.
Me too.
We're not past it, and maybe we'll never get past it.
Well, the other strange thing about this, Kartik, is that the Spanish language audience. So the Spanish language audience, historically speaking, in the last 2 seasons especially, have been really pumping up the MLS numbers. So when we're looking at average viewership for MLS, oftentimes it's Univision coming in with some big numbers that have helped increase the overall viewing figures, or slightly. Without the Spanish language audience, those numbers on ESPN and FS1 would have dropped or been plateaued, would have been not that positive. But for this tournament, for whatever reason, the Spanish language audience is not tuning in. I mean, Tudo NA, some of the viewership for their games, I don't think they've had any games that have been over 100,000 viewers. So even for Atlanta against New York Red Bulls, which was that primetime Saturday game, 52,000 people watched that one. I don't know, just let me see what else. There was the Philadelphia against Miami game. I mean, a must-win game there for Miami. And with it being Miami, you would think Spanish language audience would be watching this one intently, really interested in seeing what Miami can do with a Uruguayan coach and a lot of Latin American players, and in a market that loves and breathes and is really in love with soccer. And 110,000 viewers actually on that one for Tudo NA, which is not bad, but it's strange, Kartik, that the Spanish language audience is not interested in this tournament at all. Now, Kartik, before we move on to the next segment, I do want to ask one question, and that is that the third reason really for Major League Soccer pushing so hard on this one is because of the next TV contract. Major League Soccer must be looking at this thinking, okay, here's a chance to go ahead and shine with a national TV audience and really kind of build up a kind of a bidding war, hoping that the CBSs and the Turner, the TNTs of the world, and the DAZNs and the Apple TV and Amazon can look at these great numbers and see that there's an opportunity to go ahead and have a bidding war for the next round of MLS TV rights that are coming up, which the bidding will start next year and it'll end in 2022. Based on these numbers, Kartik, I mean, what are broadcasters thinking?
That was the huge risk with this. And I'll admit, I've had a lot of private conversations, background conversations on this specific point, that MLS was probably hoping to hit a home run with the ratings, and this would be something they could then go to broadcasters who don't currently broadcast MLS and say, hey, you can pony up. Why don't you bid on this? Now, I don't think it's damaged them in terms of getting a similar contract to what they have now. And then, of course, you have 2026 World Cup at the end of that potential rights cycle, or in the middle of that rights cycle. However, in terms of the ambition involved with staging this tournament and maybe potentially getting 750,000 or 800,000 viewers a night on the flagship ESPN, obviously, there's still the possibility that in the knockout stage they could get those numbers. But let's be honest, the NBA is starting. Champions League is starting on CBS. Maybe the window has closed. We don't know. But that was, your point is very well taken. That point mirrors my private conversations I've had with a number of people in the last few weeks about this. At
the same time, Kartik, you look at some of the other numbers for some of the other leagues, and you would think that the actual viewing figures would be a barometer of quality. But there have been a bunch of games where there's been some really dead rubbers or some really boring games. I mean, there's no other word for it. In the Premier League, and some of those viewing numbers for those games have been quite high. I mean, the Spurs-Arsenal game was a good game. That was one that finally Spurs kind of showed up, really. But that one had more viewers for that game on NBCSN on a Sunday morning than a game in prime time on Fox over the air for Atlanta's game. So what's your take?
Yeah.
Like what?
The Serie A numbers are the ones I'd like to focus on.
Okay, sure.
Because again, people think I'm, anti-Premier League or whatever. No, I probably watch still more Premier League than any other league other than the Bundesliga. Although now, this last week, I've watched more MLS than anything. But the quality gap between an average. Now, there are some games. That Spurs Arsenal game was fantastic, right? The North London Derby.
Yep.
And the first match between them, which was played the weekend of Hurricane Dorian here, I remember vividly. So they've had 2 good North London derbies this season, but the average Serie A match to quality is higher than the Premier League since the restart. I have no hesitation in saying that. The average match that ESPN shows on their flagship channel is better football from a quality standpoint than the average match shown on NBCSN since the restart in mid-June. Yet, they're going head to head, and NBCSN is getting 5 times as many viewers. Mm-hmm. So I think it's more marketing and comfort than actual quality of football. I think the American audience has made their choice, and there's something about the Premier League that's so appealing that it doesn't apply to other football leagues. And the same thing can be said for La Liga, right? La Liga, the quality is higher than Serie A, and it's much higher than the Premier League, in my opinion. And it's not even comparable. They're not even comparable products if you're talking about just quality of football. But La Liga is never going to have that kind of footprint in this country. Yeah,
and I think I ranked this a couple of weeks ago, but I'll rank it again. But the quality, for me personally, when I'm watching soccer, the quality level, number 1 would be La Liga, number 2 is Bundesliga, number 3 is Serie A, and maybe number 4 is the Premier League. But then if you look at the viewing numbers, the viewing numbers are almost opposite. It's Premier League number 1 by a huge margin on the English language side. And then you're looking at maybe the Bundesliga number 2, maybe Serie A number 3.
See, you're hitting on a great point, because I had thought that Serie A being alone and being the only league being played would kind of change the American audience's viewing preferences, because they would see Serie A, they'd see the quality, in my opinion, right now. Now, it ebbs and flows, right? These things go in cycles. But right now, this season, the quality of Bundesliga, in my opinion, is higher than the Premier League. I would go with the same exact list, same exact order as you. Premier League is 4th. And they would watch Bundesliga for a couple of weeks and be like, okay, this is good football. We're going to be more varied in what we watch. We're going to have more variety in what football we watch. But no, once the Premier League was on, they just reverted to that and did not give the other leagues really much of a shot, which is, for me, kind of frustrating. But, everybody has personal preferences.
Yeah, it's personal preferences. And I think that's the thing, though, Kartik. It is personal preferences, because it is that connection between a club and a viewer. Is with if you ask most soccer fans in the United States that you run into at random, what's your favorite team? At least for me, when I ask the question, most of the times the answer is, it's Arsenal or Man United or Liverpool, or now and again you might get, say, Club America, or you might get some. It's rarely, a Serie A team. And I've been watching soccer for probably 45 years at least. And I've watched, plenty of Italian football, German football, Spanish football, but I don't have a favorite club in Spain. I don't have a favorite club in Germany or Italy or France. I have my team that I've supported since I was a kid, that is now in the Championship, but has hopes of aspirations of getting into the Premier League. But I watch those leagues more kind of because it's focused on my team. And I guess that's the part that I think is the disconnect for a lot of these leagues. MLS is in that same mix, is that you need to create a personal bond between the actual fan and a club. And that could happen many different ways. That could happen over the FIFA video game. That could happen over social media. That could happen over friendlies or exhibitions, or even ICC. The ICC gets slated so many times, but ultimately, that's what the clubs that participate in ICC are going after. They're going after, it's a financial boost, definitely, for them, but they're trying to make direct connections one-on-one with fans, whether it's at autograph signings or whether it's at, kind of open friendlies or open training practices, etc. That, I think, to me, that's why the TV numbers, when we look at them and evaluate them, that's why they seem to be skewed in many ways, because it's not a direct correlation between quality and viewership. It's between a personal bond and a connection and that club or that league and also the broadcaster. The broadcaster is a main component of that. All right, Kartik, let's move on to listener mailbag. First up is FTC United. Man, trying to keep up with soccer is exhausting and entirely getting more expensive any daylight at the end of the tunnel on this. And it is. I mean, since we started this podcast, a few years ago, at least this version of this podcast, it's been a full-time job. It's working 70 to 80 hours a week, trying to stay on top of it. Everything from late schedule changes to Peacock launching to, Peacock. I got so many questions yesterday about from listeners and viewers and readers, which I appreciate and I'm more than eager to help answer. But so many changes, so many differences, so many issues trying to get it broadcast on your smart TV or your Chromecast or your Apple TV or your phone, whatever it may be. There is no daylight at the end of this tunnel. This is the new normal. This is, if anything, this is what we're going through a change right now, and I think it's always going to change constantly with new products, new services, new prices, new offerings. This is the new normal. So unless we go back to a Fox Soccer channel and has a channel that has the best of soccer on one channel. I know Nick Webster mentioned that as a possibility perhaps in the future. I don't see us going back to that, although I would like it. I would like to be able to just switch on a channel, Kartik, sit back and say, you know what, let me have them do the work for me. I'm gonna see the best of MLS and then the Premier League, Serie A, Bundesliga, La Liga, and maybe a night game from, say, Liga MX, and just sit back and let them play it and just sit back with a beer or a glass of soda or water or whatever you may drink and just enjoy it. Next up is John Average Geek. John Average Geek says, watching DC United against Toronto in the MLS Is Back, and other than the near sideline sky view, I like it. Hearing the players say time and space, man on, is like playing on a Saturday or Sunday growing up. Nick Siliberto says, thanks for doing the podcast. I enjoy listening every week. You've touched on this a bit, but I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you think of the long-term impact of soccer being the only live sports on US television for almost 2 months will have on its popularity in this country. Soccer having no competition from any of the major US sports is unprecedented. I'm wondering how optimistic you are about this creating a long-term increase in its popularity here. Kartik, we just talked about this a few minutes ago, but is there any positives that we can look at from this experience this summer?
Well, we just talked about it. I wish it would be different. I was really optimistic that people would give MLS a chance in prime time, Serie A a chance during the day. It hasn't happened. I'm disappointed. I mean, I guess, you've heard it in the last segment. I'm pretty angry about it, and angry about the. I think that the double standard some fans apply and people in the media apply. So no, I don't think it's going to have the lasting impact we had hoped. Maybe a slight uptick, but I don't think it's quite what I had envisioned in terms of realigning some fans. Now, this having been said, I will once again talk. I said there are people who are directors of editorials and people in newsrooms. Those people tend to be older. So as we have a transition of more younger blood into newsrooms, into the media, into kind of sports viewing influencer circles, it will change. It just I had a huge optimism that this summer would change it, and it hasn't.
I'm more convinced than ever, Kartik, that the only way for soccer to become more popular in this country is for the US to win the World Cup. And for that to happen at this stage, based on where we're at, playing level and coaching level, is a huge mountain to climb. I mean, it's not a impossibility. I mean, there's the 2026 World Cup. That gives you a slight home advantage, but I think that's the only thing that would actually change. That would change the dynamic that we're seeing with media, at least in the short term. Even long term, I'm not that optimistic. Even as older journalists retire and older kind of media professionals retire, it's a different media landscape anyway, and it's still, even among the ESPN.com, you go to that site, it's all NFL, and the NFL's not even happening. There's not much to talk about. Although if you switch on ESPN's, whether it's the ESPN, which like I did yesterday, ESPN or FS1, I just switched them on just to see what was happening, see what they were talking about, and both of them were talking about NFL stories, and then I'm like, the league's not even happening. Even when it's not happening, it's bigger than anything. So I'm pessimistic on this one. But in a way, though, Kartik, at the end of the day, to me personally, I just care about... I'm not on a crusade to make soccer the most popular sport in this country, and it's unlikely to happen in my lifetime, which means that the US is probably not going to win a World Cup in my lifetime. But I'm happy with being able to access practically any live game from around the world on my laptop, on my phone, on my TV, and be able to watch more soccer from around the world with probably a much greater commentary and analysis. And for my viewing experience as a soccer fan, even if it's not the most popular sport in this country by any means, I'm happy. All right, next up is Rover. Rover says, Nick Webster was on point with the crack dealer analogy with regards to how NBC uses the Premier League. Got everyone addicted with that extra time package, then downhill from there. Carl says, are you surprised that there hasn't been much of a Pulisic bump for Chelsea's viewership? It doesn't seem NBC is doing much to promote that they have a born and raised American objectively doing well, possibly the best story in US sports right now. And it seems they're trying to make sure they're not overdoing hyping him, which is ironic considering the network's Olympic coverage.
Well, this is where the mainstream media comes in again, and their distaste for soccer or whatever it is, their disdain for the sport or their ignorance of the sport. They're the ones who would have to do that. I mean, NBC is over the top with their Olympic coverage, right? It's USA all the time. I think they rode the Pulisic train earlier in the season. They're talking about him consistently now as he's playing well. No, there's no one writing about it in newsrooms. There's no one talking about it on mainstream American channels or American talk shows, the shout shows on ESPN and Fox. So blame them. Don't blame NBC. But yeah, I'm disappointed by it too. I thought there would be a bump for Chelsea because of Pulisic, and it hasn't happened.
There's a bump on social media, but then social media is not a really good barometer of reality in many ways. I mean, you can see, even with the last British election, you would look at social media and think that Corbyn was going to win it by a landslide.
Right.
You know what I mean? That there's so many...
And you think Bernie Sanders was winning every Democratic primary with 70% of the vote.
Right, yeah. Last but not least, Ted Hill says, maybe you've already discussed this on this show, and Kartik, this is right up your alley, but I'd be curious for your reaction to some of the reaction to the CAS ruling overturning Man City's ban for FFP. I usually don't get too aggrieved by managers' comments, but I have to admit I was very put off by a lot of the responses and back and forth in the media. Specifically, I found Pep Guardiola to be super whiny, demanding apologies and playing a woe is us card, even claiming that the club didn't have money for Alexis Sanchez or Harry Maguire. Worst of all was, of course, Jose Mourinho, who claimed the decision was a disgrace and a disaster. He also asserted that City are guilty, and if they received a fine, that they should be banned because they are guilty. But if he has read either the ruling or any article about the ruling, he would realize that the fine was simply for not cooperating with the investigation and not the actual FFP regulations. Just wish all of the managers would get on with it. And Kartik, I know FFP's been up your alley. For many years, you were on SiriusXM FC this week to talk about it with Janusz Mihalik. But what's your thoughts on what Ted's mentioning here?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of hypocrisy going on from people like Mourinho, who Mourinho has always spent wildly wherever he's been, right? And he was of course, his Chelsea teams were probably the excuse for FFP, his first set of Chelsea teams, why the established players in European football pushed FFP. This having been said, I will once again reiterate my point that financial fair play is the most anti-competitive construct I've ever seen in club football, and I am shocked that the European Union's Competition Commission allowed it to go on for this long. It is an effort. However, was sold by Platini and others. It was an effort to make sure the same clubs kept winning European competitions. The same clubs kept winning domestic leagues. It was a construct to protect them from the potential of an investor coming from outside, buying a Newcastle United, or obviously in practice it's been Manchester City, but buying a Newcastle United, a Lecce, maybe even, in Italy, or a Valencia, and spending big and overturning kind of the established shorter. So it was not fair play. It was, okay, the bigger clubs are going to remain the bigger clubs forever. People cheering this ruling, besides Manchester City fans, are the boardrooms at Everton, Sheffield United, and some other clubs in England. Those who were opposed to it were, as Ted mentions, Jose Mourinho, and then obviously Manchester United, Liverpool, and Arsenal, and Spurs all lobbied the Premier League hard. Have been lobbying the Premier League hard, from what I understand, on sanctioning Manchester City. The clubs defending Manchester City have been, not surprisingly, Everton. This is based on my reporting and what I've heard. Everton, Sheffield United, and West Ham United, all of whom may have similar ambitions to Man City. And in the case of Everton and Sheffield United, they have owners from the same region who are from countries that are politically aligned with the United Arab Emirates. So that's also kind of maybe a significant piece of it. But Everton in particular will benefit from this because they have just started to ramp up their spending. They just got Ancelotti. If you've watched them the last few weeks, you know they need about 10 new players. And now I think they're free to spend on that.
Yeah, what a joke, though, this whole FFP thing has been, Kartik. Yep. There's so much time, energy, resources put into this, and effectively it looks like it's going to get ripped up, and you know what I mean? Its clubs are going to go wild, which makes things more interesting, which definitely gives opportunities for, the Newcastle Uniteds of the world and other clubs, or for, even smaller clubs to punch above their weight.
Yeah.
But
because there was still, as you know from following the championship, Leicester, QPR, Derby, they've all had, I think Derby may have even had a points reduction 1 year for FFP violations. They've all run afoul of FFP at some point also. And those are ambitious clubs, right? Yeah. It's the clubs that are ambitious and can attract investors that would have the issue. Now, for Leicester and Wolves, this was conflicting because they were hoping Manchester City would get banned so that they could get into the top four this year. But Sheffield United did not take that attitude. They said, look, this obviously their owner is a Saudi, but which is natural alignment with Sheikh Mansour. But they felt like this was important for them to be able to kind of continue to be ambitious. And heck, they might be in Europe this year anyway.
So we want you to have your say. You can always reach us via email through web@worldsoccertalk.com, as well as facebook.com/worldsoccertalk, and on Twitter @worldsoccertalk. Plus, of course, you can always post your comments on worldsoccertalk.com, the website that started this whole thing. And Kartik, this episode has flown by. This has probably been our longest episode ever. We've had so much to get to, and with no commercials, and this is really kind of what we focus on, is the television coverage of the sport. And there's so many different interesting dynamics to it, as far as the viewership numbers, or just all the changes, or the experience of watching these games, and whether it's streaming or online or on television, that are constantly changing. So listeners, if you do have any questions, feedback, or thoughts for us, feel free to contact us through those communication methods. And Kartik, man, all right, heading into another weekend. This weekend is going to be absolutely nuts and crazy. You got NWSL, the semi-finals. You've got La Liga wrapping up. You've got an opportunity for Real Madrid to clinch this one. You've got in the Premier League, you've got the relegation battle shaping up, with teams trying to escape that relegation zone. In the Championship, you've got games that have implications on promotion, playoffs, and relegation. Oh my gosh. And then plus you got the FA Cup semi-finals this weekend too. You've got both of those are going to be live on ESPN Plus. Arsenal, Man City, Chelsea, Man United. And I'm sure I'm forgetting a whole bunch of other stuff that's happening, Kartik. But what are you going to be doing this weekend, and what should the listeners do?
Enjoying my football probably 24/7.
And maybe finding some time to watch Greyhound on Apple Plus TV, which looks amazing. I was just so disappointed that that's not on Netflix or Amazon Prime. It's even I think Tom Hanks said something negative about it being on Apple Plus TV, but maybe Ted Lasso can rescue Apple Plus TV.